The forest was glowing with soft blue light. Strange flowers sparkled like stars, and tall trees reached toward the sky. John stood still, heart pounding in his chest. He was wearing the special ceremonial robe given to him by Valari's people. He had never worn anything so strange and so beautiful. Around him, alien guests whispered in a language he couldn't understand. But he knew one thing. He was about to marry Valari, the alien woman who saved him from death, and whom he had grown to love. She was the daughter of a royal house on the planet Luthe, tall, elegant, and otherworldly. Valari walked like she was born of light and wind. John was just a human engineer from Earth. But somehow, she had chosen him. And now, under the floating lanterns of the forest, he was ready to say yes. The crowd became silent as soft music filled the air. Valari stepped forward slowly, wearing a white robe with silver markings. Her hair shimmered like moonlight, and her golden eyes locked on John's face. He smiled, heart full of wonder and disbelief. She reached out, and their hands touched. But as the priestess began the wedding words, John noticed something strange. 3 tall figures stood behind the trees, just outside the circle of light. They were watching the ceremony with cold, unblinking eyes. They didn't clap or smile. They didn't move. John leaned toward Valari and whispered, "Who are they?" Valari's smile shook slightly, her fingers tightening around his hand. "They're my sisters," she said softly, almost like she didn't want anyone to hear. "They have the right to witness." "The right to witness?" John repeated, confused. But before Valari could explain, the priestess raised her hand to speak. She was about to declare the bond complete, when one of the shadowy figures stepped forward. She had dark red hair and sharp, proud features. Her eyes glowed like fire. She pointed at John and spoke in a strong voice. "He cannot marry only one." A second sister stepped forward, her hair icy white, her gaze cold as frost. "He must be tested," she said. Then the third moved into the light, soft and calm, but with a strange smile. "If he is worthy of Valari," she said, "he is worthy of us too." The crowd gasped. John blinked, confused. "Wait, what?" Valari stepped in front of him, her body tense, her voice trembling. "Please don't do this now." But the priestess nodded slowly. "The old law still stands," she said. "If a royal daughter of Luthe chooses a husband, her sisters may also claim the right to test him." "What does that mean?" John asked, voice rising in panic. "You have to pass their trials," Valari said quietly, her eyes full of fear and regret. "If you pass, they will accept you." "And if I fail?" he asked, already dreading the answer. "They will take me from you," Valari whispered, "and send you back to Earth alone." John stared at the sisters. Lixa, the fire-haired one, stood tall. With a warrior's stance, Sira, the cold one, crossed her arms, her gaze piercing like ice, and Nayeli, the quiet one, simply watched him, as if reading his soul. "I didn't agree to this," John said, voice shaking. "It doesn't matter," Sira said calmly. "You agreed to marry a royal daughter." Lixa stepped forward again. "Prove yourself," she said, "or leave this world in shame." John turned to Valari, who looked like she wanted to cry. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't think they would do this." But John, though scared, took a breath and stood taller. "If this is the price to stay with you," he said slowly, "then I'll face whatever they throw at me." The sisters looked at each other. Then all 3 nodded. "Tomorrow," Lixa said, "your first trial begins." The wedding was paused, the music stopped, and the guests slowly left the forest, whispering about the ancient laws and the foolish human. John stood alone with Valari, holding her hand tightly. "This isn't the wedding I dreamed of," he said. Valari leaned close, resting her forehead against his. "Just survive," she whispered, "and we'll make it through." But in the shadows, Lixa's eyes burned with challenge. Syrah's mind planned her test, and Nayeli simply smiled. The sun on planet Luthe rose slowly, casting golden beams across the purple skies. John had barely slept. He sat alone on the stone steps outside Valari's family palace, his eyes watching the strange twin suns rise over the alien forest. His mind was full of questions. Why did her sisters hate him? Why did the law allow this? And most of all, what kind of tests were coming? Footsteps behind him made him turn. Valari approached quietly, her long robe dragging across the grass. She sat beside him without saying a word, just looking at the sunrise with him. He didn't speak either until finally he said, "Tell me everything." Valari took a deep breath, her hands folded in her lap. "There's something you need to understand," she said, her voice soft. "In our culture, marriage is not just between two souls. It's between families, houses, and sometimes entire bloodlines." John turned his head slowly. "So they think I'm marrying all of you?" "Not exactly," she said. "But they have the right to test your heart, mind, and strength before I can complete the bond." John let out a long breath. "And if I fail these tests?" Valari lowered her gaze. "Then they can block the union, and I would lose my place in the royal house." "Because of me?" he asked, shocked. "Because of tradition," she whispered. "They don't hate you, John. They fear what you represent." "What do I represent?" "Change," she replied. "You're the first human ever chosen by a royal daughter." John blinked, unsure if he should feel proud or terrified. Before he could answer, a voice interrupted. "Them. The trials begin at moon's zenith." It was the family priestess, tall, old, and cloaked in green silk that shimmered in the morning light. She walked with authority, her eyes glowing faintly like stars. "You must appear at the Hall of Law," she said to John. "There, you will hear the terms of each test. Can I ask what kind of tests they are?" John asked carefully. "No," the priestess replied with a soft smile. "That would ruin the lesson." And then she was gone, like a ghost in daylight. Later that day, John stood at the Hall of Law, an ancient building carved into the side of a mountain. Alien symbols glowed on the walls, and a faint hum vibrated through the air. The three sisters stood in a line before him, silent, unmoving, their expressions unreadable. Valari was not allowed to enter. The trials had to be faced alone. An alien voice echoed through the hall, deep and ancient. It was the voice of the elder matron speaking through crystal speakers. "Human of Earth," the voice said, "you stand before the daughters of Luthe. You seek to bond with one, but our law demands the test of all. Each sister will choose her own trial," the voice continued. "They will test your strength, your wisdom, and your truth. You may refuse, but if you walk away, the bond is broken, and you shall never return to this world." John took a slow breath and stepped forward. "I accept the trials," he said, his voice steady even though his knees were weak. The hall fell silent for a moment. Then Lixa, the red-haired warrior, stepped forward, her eyes locked on him like fire. "My trial is first," she said. "You will enter the Ashlands at dawn. You will be given no weapons, no guides, and no comforts. You must survive until the sun sets, without fleeing, without calling for help. And what happens if I fail?" John asked. Lixa raised her chin. "Then you prove yourself unworthy of Valari's courage." Syrah spoke next, her voice like cold wind. "My trial comes second," she said, "but not yet. You must pass the first before you may meet me." Nieli, the quiet one, smiled faintly but said nothing. She simply stepped back, her eyes never leaving John's face. After the ceremony ended, John was escorted to a small preparation chamber. A tall, alien male handed him plain clothes. Made of heat-resistant fiber, a water pouch, and a small pack with dried food. "No weapons?" John asked. "Survival is the test, not battle," the male replied. "Use your mind, human." That night, Valari came to see him one last time before the trial. "I'll be watching from afar," she said, touching his hand gently. "You don't have to do this." John looked at her, and though fear filled his chest, he said, "Yes, I do. Because I didn't come all this way to love you halfway." Valari smiled through her worry, and for a moment, the strange world around them faded away. But the next morning, as the red sun rose over the burning lands of the Ashlands, John stood alone, dust in his eyes, fire in the wind, and 3 powerful alien sisters waiting to see if he could survive. The wind in the Ashlands was dry and hot. It blew across sharp rocks and glowing sand, hissing like a whisper from the sun itself. John stood alone at the edge of the cliffs, looking down at the endless wasteland before him. Flames cracked in, the distance and smoke curled up into the sky. The air smelled like burning stone. Behind him, Lixa stood tall, her red hair tied back, her armor shining in the heat. She carried a long spear but did not offer it to him. "This is not a fight," she said firmly. "This is survival." John said nothing, only nodded. Inside he was shaking, but outside he refused to look weak. "You have from sunrise to sunset," Lixa said, pointing toward the twin suns just rising above the hills. "Survive the heat, the wild beasts, the thirst, and the land itself. No weapons, no help, no mercy." John took a deep breath and stepped forward. The heat hit him like a wave, dry and crushing. The ground cracked under his boots. Each step took effort, and sweat began to roll down his neck after only minutes. He looked back once. Lixa had already disappeared. He was truly alone. At first, he tried to follow a path between 2 hills, hoping for shade, but the rocks there were sharp and cut his hands as he climbed. He pressed forward, wrapping cloth around his palms. In the distance, he saw movement, something fast, crawling. He froze, but the creature didn't come closer. Not yet. As the sun rose higher, the air became thick and hard to breathe. His water pouch was already half empty. He found a rock that gave a little shadow and crouched under it, breathing heavily. His skin burned, but he forced himself to stay awake. Around noon, a growl came from the rocks behind him. He turned slowly and saw it. A beast, long and low, its body covered in red scales. It had 6 legs and eyes like molten gold. John didn't move. The beast crept forward, sniffing the air. John reached slowly into his bag and pulled out the only thing he had, a piece of dried fruit. He tossed it toward the beast. It sniffed the fruit, growled once, then picked it up in its mouth and backed away. John didn't breathe until it was gone. He smiled weakly. One problem solved. As the afternoon passed, his legs felt weak. He found a dried-out tree stump and sat beside it. Then he heard something. A soft cry, almost like a baby animal. John turned and followed the sound. Under a rock ledge, he found a small creature. Its leg was hurt, and its wings were torn. It looked like a mix between a bird and a lizard, and it shook in fear when he got close. John hesitated, then tore a strip from his shirt and carefully wrapped the creature's leg. He poured a few drops of water into its mouth. It blinked slowly at him, then curled into his lap. He stayed with it until the shadows grew long, when he finally stood. Up again, the small creature tried to follow. John shook his head. "No, little guy, stay here." But the creature limped behind him anyway. As the suns began to set, John climbed a final rocky ridge and stood at the top. His clothes were torn, his lips cracked, and every part of his body ached. But he was alive. Below him, Lixa waited, near a burning torch, arms crossed. When he walked down to her, she looked him up and down. You lived, she said simply. Barely, John replied, voice dry. But yes. He reached into his shirt and gently pulled out the tiny creature, which chirped weakly. I made a friend too. Lixa stared at the creature, then at John. No one has ever returned from the Ashlands with one of them alive, she said. They are considered cursed. John looked at the creature and frowned. It was hurt and scared. I couldn't leave it to die. Lixa said nothing for a long time. Then slowly she dropped to one knee. Not in defeat, but in respect. You are not just strong, she said. You are merciful. Maybe. You are worthy. John was too tired to respond, but in his heart, a quiet fire burned. He had passed the first trial, but 2 more sisters waited, and the next would test not his body, but his mind. John awoke the next morning with sore legs and burning skin. Even the soft alien sheets on his bed couldn't stop the sting left by the Ashlands. But before he could sit up, a cold voice echoed in his room. You survived fire. He turned quickly. Sarah stood at the doorway, silent, calm, and as still as ice. Her white hair was tied into a long braid, and her dark robe moved like mist. She didn't wait for him to speak. Now you face me, she said, and fire will not help you here. John stood, still aching. What kind of test is this? Sarah didn't answer. Instead, she turned and walked away. He had no choice but to follow her. They walked through a long hallway lined with crystal panels that shimmered with frozen light. The air became colder with each step. Soon John could see his breath. Finally, they entered a large circular chamber carved from glassy stone. Light bounced across the walls, creating illusions, faces, shadows, memories. Sarah stood at the center and pointed to a narrow opening in the wall. You must enter the mirror maze, she said. There, your mind will be tested, not your muscles. You will see things, images from your past, fears, lies, regrets. If you can find the center and speak one truth about yourself, the test ends. And if I fail? John asked. Then you stay lost, Sarah said coldly, and my sister loses her future. John swallowed hard, then stepped into the maze. The moment he entered, the air shifted. It was silent, too silent. The walls were made of crystal and mirror, and everywhere he looked, he saw himself. Dozens of copies walking beside him, in front of him, behind him. He took one step forward, then another. Suddenly, the reflections changed. Instead of mirrors, the walls showed memories, real ones, from Earth, his old apartment, his mother's last smile. The moment he left home to work in space, then came darker things. Times he failed, times he gave up. He saw the girl he once loved turning away. He saw his own face, crying alone in a silent kitchen. John closed his eyes and whispered, None of this matters now. But the maze didn't stop. It twisted, showing newer images. Valari crying in a hidden room, Lixa watching him fall in the Ashlands, Sarah laughing, not coldly, but cruelly. Is this what they really think of me? He asked aloud. Suddenly a voice answered. It was his own, but darker. You don't belong here, it said. You're just a lucky human, nothing more. John spun in a circle, trying to ignore it. I came here with nothing, he said. But I stayed because I found something worth fighting for. The maze grew darker. The mirrors cracked as he walked deeper. Then the walls showed something different. Valari alone, wearing her wedding dress, her face full of tears. John stopped. Heart hurting. Is this what happens if I fail? Then he saw himself again, standing at the wedding, smiling proudly. But behind him, Valari's sisters looked away, their eyes full of judgment. You'll never be one of us, his reflection said. John clenched his fists. No, he said, firmly. I don't need to be one of you. I only need to be me, honest, kind, real. I didn't come here to impress you. I came because Valari trusted me, and I won't break that trust." The maze walls suddenly shook. A deep sound rang through the air, like a bell made of ice. Ahead, a white light glowed at the center of the maze. John walked toward it slowly, carefully. When he stepped into the circle of light, Syrah was already waiting. She stood with her arms crossed, watching him closely. "I spoke my truth," John said quietly. "I'm not perfect, but I'm not a liar. I'm not pretending to be something I'm not." Syrah stepped forward, her expression unreadable. She reached up and touched his face gently. Her fingers were ice cold, but her touch was soft. "You saw what we wanted you to see," she whispered. "But you didn't run." "You didn't lie." She lowered her hand and gave a small nod. "You passed." John let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. As they walked out of the maze, he turned to her and asked, "Why do you test me this way?" Syrah looked at him and said, "Because Valari is my sister, and I won't let her give her heart to a man who can't face himself." Outside, the sun had begun to rise again. The second trial was over, and now only one sister remained. Nyeli, the quiet one, the one who had not spoken a single word since this began. John didn't know what to expect from her, but deep in his heart, he felt that her test would be the hardest yet. The palace garden was unlike anything John had seen before. Flowers glowed softly in the moonlight, their petals opening and closing like breathing creatures. Strange vines floated gently in the air, and small lights danced above the silver pond. It was quiet, not just silent, but full of peace. John walked slowly, his boots making almost no sound on the soft grass. Nyeli had sent no message, no instructions, only a whisper carried by the wind. Come to the garden at night. He didn't know what her test would be, but after surviving the fire and facing his own fears in the maze, he thought nothing could surprise him now. He was wrong. She stood near the center of the garden, surrounded by blooming star blossoms. Her long dress shimmered like water, and her hair flowed like silk under the twin moons. She didn't look at him right away. Instead, she touched a flower gently, as if listening to its secrets. "Nyeli," John said softly, stopping a few feet away. She turned, her golden eyes calm and unreadable. "I'm ready," he added, but she shook her head. "There is no trial." John blinked. "What do you mean?" She stepped closer, her hands folded in front of her. "You've shown strength," she said, "and truth. I don't need to test those things." "Then, what do you need?" he asked carefully. Neely looked at him for a long time, as if searching his soul. Then she whispered, "I want to understand you." John was confused. "Understand me how?" Nyeli motioned to a stone bench, and both of them sat down facing the glowing pond. "For 1 hour," she said, "tell me everything about your world. About Earth, your people, your love, your fear, your dreams." John looked at her, surprised. "That's it?" Nyeli nodded. "Your voice is the only thing I want to hear tonight." He hesitated, then began. He talked about Earth, the blue sky, the oceans, the trees that turned red in autumn. He described music and laughter and rain that tapped on, windows. He told her about growing up with nothing, about how he built machines and fixed old things just to survive. He spoke of mistakes, people he hurt, moments he ran away from. Then he spoke of Valari, how he met her, how her smile calmed him even when everything felt broken inside. Nyeli listened without speaking. She didn't blink much, just watched him, as if every word painted a new world around her. Finally, he stopped. He had said more in that hour than he had in months, and yet her expression didn't change. "Why me?" she asked softly. John tilted his head. "What do you mean?" "You're not strong like Lixa," she said, "not sharp like Syrah." You're just kind. John gave a weak smile. Sometimes kindness is the hardest thing. To stay kind in a world full of pain. That's strength, too. Nearly leaned back, her eyes looking up at the stars. Then she whispered something that froze John's heart. What if none of us can give you children? He stared at her, unsure what to say. She continued. Our kind, when bonded outside our bloodline, it often ends in silence. No future, no children. Would you still stay? John looked down, quiet. Then he spoke slowly. I didn't fall in love with Velari to make babies. I fell in love with her because when she looked at me, I didn't feel small anymore. I felt seen. Nieli turned to him, her voice barely a whisper. And if you must carry the burden of all four of us? John chuckled softly. That's not a burden. It's a gift I never expected. But I won't lie, I'm scared too, she nodded. Good. Fear makes us honest. Then Nieli stood and stepped close. She reached out and touched his chest with her palm. Her voice carried the quiet power of water in the night. You have passed. John looked surprised. Just like that? She smiled gently. Your truth didn't need to be forced. You gave it freely. And that's rare. As they walked back through the garden, Nieli walked beside him, silent but peaceful. When they reached the gate, she paused and said, Velari chose well. But as John left the garden and looked up at the palace lights, he knew something was still waiting. The sisters had accepted him. But the ancient law wasn't complete. A final judgment awaited, not just from the sisters, but from the elder matron herself. And somewhere in the shadows, someone else was watching. Someone who didn't want the human to win. Someone who believed. No outsider should ever touch royal blood. The hall of skyglass shimmered under the first morning light. Its ceiling was open to the heavens, and its walls were made from crystal that sang softly when the wind passed through. This was the place where ancient oaths were made, and where the final judgment would be spoken. John stood in the center, dressed in ceremonial cloth given to him by Velari's family. His wounds from the ashland still ached, and his heart still trembled from the mirror maze. But he stood tall. All four sisters were present. Velari wore silver and blue, her eyes filled with both pride and worry. Lixa stood like a statue of fire, arms crossed. Sira looked cold, but a small nod from her gave him strength. Nieli stayed, quiet, her fingers gently touching a flower pinned to her chest. One John had described during their talk in the garden. A circle of elders watched from raised seats around the hall. And then the elder matron entered. She was ancient, so old that her skin looked like folded silk and her eyes glowed dimly like dying stars. She wore robes that had once belonged to her mother and her mother before her. Each step she took made no sound, but every being in the hall grew still. She raised one hand and a soft chime rang through the air. Let the record begin, she said, her voice slow but clear. 3 daughters of the royal blood have tested the human male named John. Lixa, speak. Lixa stepped forward and dropped to one knee. Trial of strength complete, she said firmly. He survived what few have dared to face. He did not break, and he showed mercy to a creature we consider cursed. I call him worthy. The elder matron nodded slowly. Sira, speak. Sira moved next, her voice calm as a winter wind. Trial of mind complete, she said. He walked through fear, through doubt, and saw through illusion. He spoke truth without being forced. I call him worthy. Again, the matron nodded. Nieli, speak. Nieli did not kneel. She simply walked forward and placed a small crystal on the ground in front of John. Trial of soul complete, she said gently. He gave me his story. Not to impress, not to win, but simply to share. I call him worthy. Now all eyes turned to Valari. She walked forward slowly, heart pounding. I chose him before the trials, she said. But now, after all I've seen, I choose him again. With all I am, the matron looked at John now, her eyes sharp despite her age. You were not born of our world, she said. You hold no title, no legacy, no blood of stars. Why should you be bound to 4 daughters of the royal house? John took a breath, then stepped forward. I didn't come here asking for a crown, he said. I came because I love one woman, but I stayed because I respect all 4. They are not prizes, they are not rewards. They are people. And if they accept me, then I will carry their names with pride, even if I remain a nameless human. The hall went silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then the elder matron raised both hands. By the law of Luthe, and by the voice of her daughters, the human John is judged. Worthy. With this judgment, he is now bound by oath to Valari. And if the sisters choose to bind themselves, they may do so freely. Lixa stepped forward, then placed her hand on John's shoulder. I choose to stand beside you, she said. Sira followed, placing her hand on his other shoulder. I choose to protect what you now protect. Nayeli came last, touching his back gently. I choose to walk in your shadow and let you walk in mine. John looked at Valari, who smiled through tears. He didn't speak. His heart was too full. The crowd of elders nodded in approval. The hall rang with a soft chime of finality, but just as the ceremony ended, a loud voice echoed across the chamber. I challenged the human. Everyone turned. A tall male alien with golden armor stepped forward. His name was Relkor, a powerful noble who had once been promised to Valari before she broke tradition and chose John. He raised his arm and pointed. This human took what was meant for me. He growled, I call for the duel of blood and bond. Gasps filled the hall. The elder matron's eyes narrowed. The duel is old law, she said slowly. But it has not been called in 100 years. Relkor smirked. Then let it be remembered today. I will prove the human is not worthy, not by words, but by battle. John's fists clenched. He turned to Valari. What do I do? Before she could answer, Lixa stepped forward. If he fights, she said coldly, he fights with us. Sira drew a blade from her robes. Let Relkor see the meaning of chosen by all, Nayeli whispered. He doesn't stand alone. John looked at the angry noble, and without fear in his voice he said, You want to fight? Then fight all of us. Relkor stood tall in the arena of the Hall of Skyglass. His golden armor shimmered, and the twin blades in his hands hummed with power. He looked down at John like a lion ready to crush a mouse. Around them, nobles, elders, and guests watched, in silence. But this was no longer just a test of marriage. It was now a fight for honor, pride, and a future that had never been seen before. John stepped forward without armor, only a simple cloth over his chest. No blade in his hand, no shield. To protect him, just courage in his eyes. I didn't come here to fight, he said, voice steady. But if I must fight for them, I will. Before Relkor could answer, Lixa stepped beside John. She pulled a short blade from her belt and offered it to him. You're not alone, she said. Sira followed, holding a crystal dagger, her gaze sharp. We fight as one, Nayeli moved without sound, her hand glowing with gentle energy. I won't let anyone take you away. Valari stood across the circle, watching with tears in her eyes. She could not fight, but her soul burned like fire. For the first time, the traditions of Luthe were being challenged not by violence, but by love. The elder matron stepped forward and raised her staff. This duel will follow the law of 4. she declared. "Each party may bring their chosen allies. Should the challenger fall or surrender, the human shall be accepted forever," Relkor sneered. "4 women defending a weak man." "You've already lost." But he was wrong, because when the horn blew, it was not weakness that met him, it was unity. Lixa charged first, blades clashing with Relkor's in a shower of sparks. She moved like a storm, fierce and fast. Relkor blocked her strikes but struggled to match her raw power. Sira darted from the side, her dagger slashing low. She moved like ice, precise, calm, deadly. Relkor growled and swung at her, but she danced away. Jon didn't stay behind. He picked up a staff from the arena floor and rushed in. He wasn't a warrior, but he was smart. He aimed low, tripping. Relkor, just as Lixa landed a blow across his shoulder, Nieli stood back, her hands glowing. She whispered a word in the old tongue, and vines from the garden burst through the arena floor. They wrapped around Relkor's legs, slowing him, confusing him. The crowd gasped. Never had a human and 3 alien royal sisters fought as one. Their movements were not perfect, but they were in sync. It was not power that overwhelmed Relkor. It was togetherness. Relkor roared and broke free of the vines. With a scream of rage, he leapt at Jon, blade raised high, but Valari stepped forward from the edge of the circle and shouted, "Stop!" Her voice rang like thunder. Everyone froze, even Relkor. Valari stepped into the arena, her hands glowing with royal fire. "You lost," she said, voice trembling, "not because you are weak, but because you never learned to stand with others." She walked to Jon, placed her hand on his chest, and looked at the elder matron. "This is not just my mate," she said. "He is our choice." The elder matron looked at Relkor, who stood shaking with anger. Then she turned to the crowd and raised her staff again. "The law is clear," she said. "The human, Jon of Earth, is now bound by oath and trial to the daughters of Luthe. He is chosen." The crowd slowly began to bow. First one, elder, then another, then all the guests followed. Even the guards lowered their heads. Jon stood in the center, surrounded by the 4 sisters. He wasn't just a visitor anymore. He was family. That night, under the starlit sky, a new celebration began. It was not like the wedding before. There were no stiff traditions, no cold formalities. There was laughter, music, dancing. The people of Luthe welcomed something new, something human. Jon stood beside Valari, Lixa, Sira, and Nieli. Each one took his hand at different times, shared stories, smiled quietly. He didn't need a crown. He didn't need power. He had something. Greater, respect, love, and a future that he built with his heart, not his sword. As the music played and stars danced above them, Valari whispered to him. One bride wasn't enough. Jon laughed softly. "No," he said, looking at all of them. "One heart opened 4 more. And the galaxy would remember the man who didn't conquer a kingdom, but won the trust of its fiercest daughters. Together, they didn't just change tradition. They rewrote it.